She called me on a Tuesday afternoon, and I could hear the smile in her voice. Not the warm kind. The kind you wear when you've already won. Dad, my daughter said, we've decided to sell the cottage. I've already accepted an offer. We are signing Thursday. I didn't say anything for a moment. Just stood there in the kitchen holding the phone, looking out at the backyard where the snow was still thick along the fence line. It was February. Cold and grey the way Ontario gets in February. The kind of cold that settles into your bones if you've lived here long enough. The Muskoka property? I finally said. Yes, Dad. It only makes sense. You're not up there half the time anymore, and the maintenance costs alone, I see. I knew you'd be difficult about this. Her tone shifted, sharper now. This is exactly why we handled it ourselves. We have power of attorney, Dad. It's all perfectly legal. I almost laughed. Almost. You're right, I said. You do have power of attorney. A pause. She was waiting for the argument, the begging, the old man falling apart on the other end of the line. When it didn't come, I heard something flicker in her voice. Uncertainty, maybe. Or the first faint edge of suspicion. Well, she said, I'm glad you're being reasonable. The buyers want possession by April. Have a good evening, I told her. And I hung up. I set the phone down on the counter and stood there in the quiet for a long time. Then I went to the living room, poured myself 2 fingers of scotch, the Glenfarclas I'd been saving, and sat in the armchair by the window. The streetlights outside were just starting to come on. A neighbor was scraping ice off his windshield. Ordinary Tuesday. I thought about the cottage. I had built that place with my own hands, mostly. Not entirely. I'd hired a contractor for the foundation and the roof framing. But the rest of it, the deck, the dock, the interior work, that was me. Me and my brother-in-law George, who passed away 8 years ago now. We'd spent 3 summers on it, back in the late 80s, driving up every Friday after work, coming home Sunday nights exhausted and smelling like sawdust and lake water. My wife Margaret loved it from the first summer. She said it was the one place in the world where she could actually hear herself think. We'd raised our daughter up there every summer. She'd learned to swim off that dock. She'd had her first boyfriend there at 17, though she didn't know I knew about that. We'd scattered Margaret's ashes off the end of that dock 9 years ago on a September evening when the water was still warm and the maples had just started to turn. And now she'd sold it. I want you to understand something about my daughter, because I don't want to paint her as a monster when the truth is more complicated than that. She's not a cruel person by nature. She's ambitious, which I always admired in her. She worked hard, got her MBA from Western, married a man named Conrad who works in commercial real estate in Toronto. They have a good life, a beautiful house in Oakville, 2 kids in private school. The kind of life where a lakefront cottage in Muskoka is more of a tax liability than a retreat. The trouble started after Margaret died. Grief does strange things to families. Some it brings together, some it tears apart in ways that were already there, invisible, just waiting for the right pressure. I think my daughter had been angry at me for a long time. For things I did wrong, for things I could have done better, for the particular disappointments of having a father who was more comfortable with a spreadsheet than a conversation. After Margaret was gone, there was no buffer, and the anger came out sideways. The way it does, in disputes about the estate, about the house in Kingston, about how I was spending my retirement. The power of attorney had been her idea. She'd been practical about it, or seemed to be. I was 68, she said, and it made sense to have things arranged properly. I'd agreed because at the time I trusted her completely. I was not careful enough. I'll admit that. I should have read the document more thoroughly. I should have had my own lawyer review it. But you don't think like that with your own child. You think you're being a good parent, giving her the tools to help you if something goes wrong. What you don't anticipate is that she'll use those tools before anything goes wrong at all. Conrad had been pushing the cottage sale for 2 years. He'd done an appraisal without telling me, gotten a number he liked, and begun quietly positioning the property with a colleague at his brokerage. My daughter had convinced herself, I think genuinely, that it was the right thing, that I was too old to manage the upkeep, that the money would be better invested in something liquid, that she was looking out for me. People are remarkably good at reframing their own self-interest as generosity. They had not asked me. They had not told me. They had accepted an offer on my property. A property I had built with my own hands, where my wife's ashes were scattered, and they called me on a Tuesday afternoon to inform me of the closing date. What my daughter did not know was what I had done 6 months earlier. In August, after a conversation with an old friend of mine, a retired estates lawyer named Fowler, who I've known since we were both young men at a firm in Ottawa, I had made some changes. Quiet changes, the kind that don't announce themselves. I had established a trust. Fowler had explained it to me over dinner at his house in the Glebe. The kind of conversation old men have when they've both seen enough of the world to know that certain things need to be said plainly. He'd watched situations like mine before, not identical, but familiar in structure. Adult children with power of attorney, elderly parents, properties that sat at the intersection of sentiment and significant money. The power of attorney gives her authority to act on your behalf, Fowler said, but it doesn't give her authority over assets held in a properly structured trust. The trustee is the owner, legally speaking, and unless she's the trustee, she can't touch it. I had transferred the cottage into the trust in September, 3 months before my daughter's phone call. Fowler had handled the paperwork himself. The transfer was registered at the Land Registry office in Bracebridge on a Thursday morning in September, a Thursday I happened to spend in Muskoka, walking the property for what I thought might be the last time if things didn't go the way I hoped. I stood on the dock for a long time that day. The lake was glass-flagged, and the birches along the opposite shore had gone yellow. A loon called twice somewhere north of the bay, then went quiet. I thought about Margaret, the way I always do when I'm up there. I talked to her a little, out loud, which I know sounds eccentric, but she was always the one who knew what to do in situations like this. I like to think she would have approved. My daughter's lawyer called Fowler on Friday morning, 2 days after her call to me. I wasn't there for the conversation, but Fowler related to me afterward, with the particular quiet pleasure of a man who has practiced law for 40 years and still appreciates a clean outcome. The lawyer, a young woman from a firm in Mississauga, had begun by confirming the details of the pending sale: the address, the legal description, the offer price, the scheduled closing. Fowler had listened politely. Then he had explained that the property in question was no longer in my name, that it had been transferred to a trust in September, that the power of attorney my daughter held had no jurisdiction over trust assets, that the offer her clients, my daughter and Conrad, had accepted on behalf of a property they did not control was not enforceable, that the buyers, a couple from Barrie who had already given notice on their rental, had been misled as to the ownership status of the property. There was a long silence on the phone. "I'll need to verify this," the young lawyer said. "Please do," Fowler said. "The registration is public record. My daughter called me that afternoon." This time there was no smile in her voice, warm or otherwise. "Dad, what did you do?" "What do you mean?" "The cottage. The trust. When did you? Why didn't you tell us?" I took my time answering. I was in the kitchen again. Same window, same grey February sky. But something felt different. Lighter, maybe. "You didn't tell me you were selling it," I said. "That's not the same. You accepted an offer on a property that belongs to me without asking me, without telling me. You called me to announce a closing date." I paused. "So I'd say we're about even on the telling each other things front. Conrad's going to lose his commission. The buyers could sue." "Conrad listed a property he had no authority to sell," I said. "That's a problem for Conrad." She was crying by then, which was difficult to listen to. Whatever else is true about my daughter, she is still my daughter, and I am still her father, and the sound of her crying has always been something I could not easily bear. But I had spent 9 years being lonely and accommodating and patient, and I had almost lost the last real piece of my marriage because I had trusted her too completely, and she had mistaken that trust for passivity. "I want to understand something," I said, when she had settled a little. "Not as a legal matter. Just between you and me. Did you think I wouldn't mind, or did you think I wouldn't find out?" A long silence. "Both," she finally said. "I thought I told myself you'd be relieved, that you'd thank us eventually." "I see. I know how that sounds. It sounds like something you told yourself so you wouldn't have to ask me." I heard her breath on the line. I heard Conrad's voice in the background, low and urgent, asking what was happening. "The buyers are going to be furious," she said. "Your lawyer should contact them today and explain the situation honestly. If there are damages from the failed transaction, that's something you and Conrad will need to address. Fowler has already documented the timeline. Are you going to sue us?" I thought about that. I thought about the dock and the loon and Margaret's ashes in that dark water. No, I said. I'm not going to sue you. She exhaled. I'm not going to sue you. She exhaled. But I'm not selling the cottage, I said. Not now, not for the foreseeable future. And I'm revoking the power of attorney, effective as soon as Fowler can file the paperwork, which will be Monday. Dad, I'd like to come for Easter, I said. I'd like to see the kids. I think we can do that. But I need you to understand that what you did was not done on my behalf. It was done instead of asking me. And I need you to understand this. I am not yet at the point in my life where my wishes stop mattering. She didn't say anything for a moment. Okay, she said quietly. Good. I drove up to Muskoka the following weekend, took the 400 north on a Friday afternoon, the way I had done hundreds of times. The familiar long pull through Barrie and up into the Sheen country, where the rock cuts rise up on both sides of the highway and the landscape opens into something older and quieter. I stopped at the Tim Hortons in Aurelia the way I always do, got a large dark roast, sat in the parking lot for a few minutes watching the cars go by. The cottage was cold when I arrived. I got the propane going, stacked some wood in from the porch, lit a fire. By 8 o'clock, the main room was warm and the windows were running with condensation, and I had eaten a bowl of soup and poured a small scotch and put on the old Lightfoot record that Margaret had loved, the one with Sundown and Carefree Highway, the songs she'd known all the words to. I sat in the chair by the fire for a long time. The next morning, I walked down to the dock just after first light. The lake was frozen out about 30 feet, and then open water beyond, dark and still. It was cold enough that my breath came out in clouds. I stood there in my coat and boots listening to the silence. The particular silence of a Muskoka morning in February, which is one of the quietest things I know. I did not talk out loud that morning. I just stood there. I thought about how close it had come. I thought about the young couple from Barrie who had almost bought this place without knowing what it was. I thought about my daughter, who she was at 7 years old, jumping off this dock with both arms out, and who she had become, and whether those two people were reconcilable. I thought they probably were. Not easily, not quickly, but probably. The trust will hold the property after I am gone. I've arranged it so the cottage passes to my grandchildren when they are adults, old enough to understand what they're inheriting. Whether they keep it or sell it will be their choice to make, freely, with full knowledge of what it is. That's how it should go. I went back inside and made coffee and eggs and ate breakfast looking out at the lake. A chickadee landed on the railing of the deck, looked at me with one bright eye and flew away. I thought I still know how to protect what matters. I thought I am not finished yet. And that, I suppose, is the whole of it. I keep thinking about that chickadee on the deck railing. One bright eye, then gone. It didn't ask permission. It just showed up, looked around, and flew off on its own terms. I think about that more than I expected to. What happened with my daughter and the cottage didn't come out of nowhere, even if it felt that way on that Tuesday afternoon. Things like this rarely do. They build slowly. In the silences between conversations, in the small decisions where someone chooses convenience over honesty, in the moment a person tells themselves a comfortable story instead of asking a hard question. My daughter didn't wake up one morning and decide to become someone who would do this. She arrived there gradually, and I had played my part in allowing it. By being too distant when she was young, too accommodating after her mother died, too willing to interpret her silence as contentment. I'm not excusing what she did. I want to be clear about that. What she and Conrad did was wrong, and it had real consequences for real people, including a young couple from Barrie who nearly lost their deposit on a property that was never legally available. Actions reach further than we intend them to. That's something I've learned over 68 years, and it's something I hope my daughter is learning now. But I also think about my own choices. The trust wasn't only a legal maneuver. It was, if I'm honest, the first time in years that I had acted with genuine clarity about what I valued and what I was willing to protect. Fowler had given me the tour, but I had to decide to use it. I had to sit with the discomfort of anticipating a conflict with my own child and choose to prepare for it anyway and not talk myself out of it because it felt disloyal. That took something. I don't say that to congratulate myself. I say it because I think that kind of clear-eyed decision-making, knowing what you stand for and acting on it before the crisis arrives, not after, is something I had let go soft over the years of being agreeable and tired and grief-worn. Margaret was always the sharper one between us in that way. She knew what she thought and she said it. I admired it in her, and I think I leaned on it more than I should have. Let her carry more of the moral clarity in our marriage than was fair. After she was gone, I had to find my own. What I want my grandchildren to understand someday, when they're old enough to sit in the cottage and think about where it came from, is that keeping something worth keeping requires all three of the things that are hardest to hold on to at once: knowing right from wrong and acting on it even when it costs you something, thinking carefully enough ahead that you're not always scrambling to catch up, and having the endurance to stay standing when someone you love does something that could knock you flat. My daughter and I are not finished. Easter was quiet, but it was real. The kids ran around the backyard and Conrad shook my hand at the door and nobody said very much about any of it, which was probably right for now. There's a long road back and I don't know exactly what it looks like. But I know the cottage will be there at the end of it, and that for the moment is enough.